Hello, I'm here with Karen Brooks Hopkins, who is the former president of the Brooklyn Academy of Music, one of the world's leading performing arts centers, and also the author of a new memoir, Bam, and Then It Hit Me. And we're here to talk about arts in the city, the role of the arts in economic development and empowering the growth of cities. So first of all, welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Seth. It's great to see you and to be participating in this really interesting conference.
Well, it's great to be here with you as well. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to start maybe with a more general question, which is that the memoir that you've written is about your experience at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, but one of the interesting things that you do in the book is you talk about how what happened during your tenure in Brooklyn is really a model that could be applied to other cities. So maybe as a starting point, if you could give us a brief description of how BAM transformed itself and how it in turn transformed the neighborhood and the borough around it over the course of your tenure.
Well, it's sort of an amazing story. The Brooklyn Academy of Music, for anyone who doesn't know it, is the oldest performing arts center in America. It actually opened in Brooklyn Heights in 1861 during the American Civil War. It burned to the ground in that location in 1903, and a committee of 100 citizens of Brooklyn raised the money to build a new facility in the Fort Greene section of the borough, and that building opened in 1907. So BAM has had a long and illustrious history of presenting performing arts work in all disciplines from all over the world for many, many years. I arrived at BAM not in 1861, but in 1979. And I joined the staff of the fundraising staff and development at that time, and then moved up the food chain there and became president of the institution in 1999 and stayed until my retirement in 2015. So I was there for 36 years. And during that time, we not only had an incredible artistic renaissance and amazing campus expansion, we also really were part of the evolution of Brooklyn. And I kind of call this the evolution from Manhattan wannabe to the coolest neighborhood on the planet. And I believe that transition was really powered by arts and culture. And since my retirement, I have focused on this issue, how arts and culture can be a dynamic force, an authentic force, and a positive force for uplifting communities, revitalizing communities, and bringing out the best in what is already there. And Brooklyn is a good example of this. When I started, there used to be an old joke that we would tell. Somebody would say, "Where is such and such an event playing?" And the other person would say, "Well, it's at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and then it'll be in London." And the first person would respond and say, "Okay, I'll see it in London." And this joke represented the resistance to going over that bridge. Now, of course, things have changed, and I say to people all over the borough of Manhattan and beyond, if you want to see your kids, you're coming to my neighborhood, because all of the young people, the great energy of the city, and the real kind of New York with attitude, I think is really now, its heart is in Brooklyn. So the transition has been quite remarkable. What existed as a sort of desolate neighborhood that had been kind of taken apart by the urban renewal policies of the 60s, buildings knocked down and just parking lots left and a kind of an empty shell of itself, today has one of the great cultural districts in the world. In 5 square blocks, you have 9 venues ranging from 250 seats on the northern end of the district to 1,000 seats at the Barclays Center Arena on the southern tip of the district. And surrounding these 9 in the core, there are 55 additional cultural institutions. So it is a real story of urban transformation, as I said, powered by the arts.
So let me ask this, and having worked side by side with you through at least a portion of this period, I think I know the story well, but for those who are listening to this conversation and who aren't as familiar with New York or Brooklyn or the transformation that occurred, can you describe with a little more specificity how this incredible change that took place in Brooklyn over the course of a handful of decades was driven by the arts? I mean, it's a big claim to be making that arts institutions like BAM were responsible for this. And maybe you can explain a little bit about how it really is true that they were the fuel that powered this engine.
You know, the arts powered this engine, but it was really the partnership between the city of New York and the arts. And you know this very well from your former role leading the Economic Development Corporation of New York. Even before, let's go back further, to the early 70s, when the borough presidents in New York City had a lot of economic clout, they began to invest in the well-being of cultural institutions. And the borough of Brooklyn had a lot of great ones. The Brooklyn Museum, BAM, and several other organizations that were spread throughout the borough were pretty powerful institutions and great historic places with great buildings. These government officials started investing in them slowly. So while they were coming back and rejuvenating, that kind of public-private partnership made it possible to do more and be more. But then what really happened on the artistic side. BAM realized that it could never be a real competitor, say, with Lincoln Center or any of the great Manhattan institutions. There simply wasn't the money. There wasn't the powerful board. There wasn't the scope. So what we decided to do, rather than being a second-rate Lincoln Center, was to be a first-rate BAM. And what that meant was finding a unique brand, doing things artistically that you couldn't see anywhere else in the city. So we really took a couple of points of view. One was that we were going to reflect art that was experimental, edgy, avant-garde in every discipline. And in this way, we would show the most cutting-edge works from the most avant-garde artists from all over the world. And the from all over the world part is the second thing that we did. We looked around and we saw that most of the pieces that were being performed in large theaters in Manhattan were classical works in a very European tradition. So we decided to go global. And we really pushed out bringing work from all over the world, bringing things that had never been seen in New York, doing them for a certain amount of days, only here, only now, only at BAM, and then it's gone. We had large venues to fill. The Opera House at BAM has 2,000 seats, the Harvey Theater, 800 seats, and so on and so on. So it was a way of trying to solve the problem by coming up with our own identity, that being the first part, and then really doubling down on Brooklyn, building a Brooklyn audience, building an international following, doing things that were going to drive energy and bring people to the borough. And this is what created the blueprint for success.
And just to build on that, if I were listening to that description, I would say, okay, I understand how you completely transformed BAM and turned it into this international powerhouse, but how did you translate what was happening inside the four walls of your theaters to the benefit of the neighborhood and the borough that was surrounding you?
In every way, what we tried to do was be both global and local. I mean, we hear that all the time, but we were really doing it. When we put together festivals, for example, the Next Wave Festival, which is BAM's signature program of experimental and adventurous work in all disciplines, we launched that festival in 1983. But the idea was always to have a mix of Brooklyn artists, New York City artists, and then artists from all over the world. So there was always a strong Brooklyn component. We also did a lot of outreach to Brooklyn audiences. We also did a lot of work in the education sphere, in the community outreach sphere, and there were many different things that we tried to do that would constantly double back and reconnect to the home borough. We had community leaders nights. We developed a lot of relationships with many elected officials and community leaders in many different neighborhoods. And the idea was to connect, connect, and connect, and to make Brooklyn a part of everything that we were doing. When we added the Fisher building, the BAM Fisher, and I guess that was probably about 8 or 9 years ago now, in part, we built that building with your help and with the help of the city of New York. We built it because we needed a smaller venue for more local presentations. What we realized was that it was not going to be possible for many local artists to do their work in a 2,000-seat theater or an 800-seat theater with 6 labor unions. So we created a different kind of contract and labor setup, and we organized programs that were very suitable for a 250-seat space. We also set up a rental program that had rates for commercial rates, not-for-profit rates, and Brooklyn not-for-profit rates, so that local Brooklyn institutions would have access to the facility at the lowest possible price. So everything we did, we tried to think and push through the local lens as well as the global lens.
I think what was also really interesting about the work that you did while at BAM, and I think could potentially provide a blueprint to other communities, was that in addition to the work that you did to bring Brooklyn into BAM, you also really sought to translate the success that you were having within your 4 walls into the neighborhood outside. And you talked a little bit about the public-private partnership that was behind the creation of the BAM Cultural District, where suddenly your neighborhood in Fort Greene was no longer just considered the place for BAM and then the neighborhood, but that the whole neighborhood became a cultural neighborhood. Can you talk a little bit about what the thinking behind that was and how that came to fruition, and what today the cultural district looks like as opposed to what it looked like when the process started?
Well, it was a really complicated and long journey. First of all, we started with the name BAM Cultural District, and then we ended with the name Brooklyn Cultural District. And we did that, and I think it was right. I fought hard to keep the name BAM Cultural District because, BAM was my place. But in the end, I was persuaded by the 8 additional partners who lived in the district with us that BAM then was overwhelming everything. It was too much, and that the right thing to do was to back off a little bit and give everyone a sense of place and to call it the Brooklyn Cultural District. So finally, I too saw the light and agreed with them. And now I think that that was the right decision. But really what happened was this crazy 40-year story. We started off with a goal of trying to create a context for BAM, bringing other cultural institutions into the area so that there would be more destination status. Remember that BAM also sits on the 3rd largest transportation hub in New York City. So there was a lot of access points. There were all these empty parking lots around. So there was really no displacement. There was room to build and room to grow. And we wanted to grow it as an arts district because we knew that there would be compatibility for the work that BAM was doing. We knew that so many of our colleagues were being priced out of Manhattan and were ready to come to Brooklyn. And we also knew that the youngest, most adventurous audience was going to be right in our own neighborhood. So all of the ingredients were there. So first we did a master plan, which then got unfunded by the city. Then several years went by and we kind of did it on our own, and then it got refunded. Refunded, defunded, refunded, defunded. This went on for 40 years till finally the thing just happened kind of organically. And I'm not necessarily recommending that organic is the way to go and that it take 40 years. But this was our path. And what ended up happening was what I call a model for the cultural district concept of the 21st century. How does that look? It means that small and large institutions are right up next to each other. It means that you have visual arts and performing arts right next to each other. It means that there's a very active street life and a churn of activity going on all the time. And ultimately, what it means is that the cultural district reflects the energy of 21st century New York City. That's what you want to do, is be a metaphor for that vibe. But in truth, every community can kind of do this without having to be a Brooklyn or what became our Brooklyn. Because really what you do is you start by saying, what do we have here that's great? What do we have here that is really great, that brands us and identifies us as a community? And then you take that thing and you just blow it out all the way. And that's kind of the vibe that we created in the Brooklyn Cultural District. And I see that happening now all over the world. And I think it becomes a very good formula for that authentic, inclusive cultural districts can make the maximum economic, artistic, and economic impact on their communities. That's what we were trying to do. And while COVID definitely hurt, because we were shut down for such a long time, I feel energy teeming in Brooklyn, all around BAM, when I walk through the neighborhood today.
Let me just pick up on one thing that you just said. You said that this is a model that could be replicated anywhere, and you gave the generic formula that any community could follow. Can you maybe give one or two examples of places that maybe people would be surprised have used this strategy and actually succeeded?
There are many ways to make this happen, and I'll give you a couple that I think are incredible. If you take the city of Adelaide in Australia, for example, it's a festival city. They literally have, I believe, 10 festivals there, and they go on all year long. There's a history festival. There's an LGBTQ festival. There's a film and television festival. There's the main Adelaide Performing Arts Festival. There's a writers festival. And these things just continue to evolve and to draw crowds and draw energy to the city. And it just enhances the economy and destination status of that city. So a series of festivals is one way to go. Another way, if you look at a small rural community, one I've been reading about, is Gee's Bend, Alabama. Median income, $16,000 a person, or family even. No gas station, no hotel, a very deeply impoverished community. But they have one thing there. They have these miraculous quilters who've been making these quilts for many, many years. These quilts have been deemed, quote unquote, some of the greatest pieces of contemporary American art ever. So now, with a little foundation investment, they are selling these quilts online. They are offering workshops. They have built community Airbnbs. They're adding a small hotel and a cultural center where people can come and learn about quilting. In the last year, they took in $300,000 just kind of selling the quilts. Here is an example of the tiniest community in a place that you wouldn't even know about unless you were from Alabama, reinventing itself and succeeding based on its own cultural heritage, welcoming visitors, examining its heritage, branding itself. This is a great story. And I can tell you 20 of these stories. I've been collecting a bibliography of these things. I now probably have more information on this than any person on the planet, of looking at places where arts and culture has led the transformation in a positive way of cities and communities all over the world.
Well, now that you've let the secret out, there's going to be a run on real estate in Gee's Bend, Alabama.
I hope so. I hope so.
But in all seriousness, and actually picking up on that theme in just a couple of minutes, because I know we're running short on time, Brooklyn is an incredible story of transformation. And I think there are few who would argue that what happened in Brooklyn is anything short of miraculous. And certainly BAM played a critical role in that. But one of the knocks on Brooklyn and places like Brooklyn is that as the borough became more dynamic and attracted people, you saw prices rise. And one of the consequences of that were that communities that had for many, many years lived in neighborhoods were suddenly displaced. And the borough became a place for the upper middle class and the wealthy rather than for a diverse population. So one question for you as you think about what happened in Brooklyn and maybe more generically, first of all, do you think that that knock is true? And second of all, if there is some truth to it, is there a way to do this where you can still avoid that kind of outcome?
You know, I think we've learned a lot in the years, even since the Brooklyn Cultural District came to pass. The good news was that now there are 7,500 more people kind of living in the BAM zone than there were, say, when I started. And they are all potentially donors and subscribers to every institution there. So that's good news that there's more people, more energy, and potentially more resources and support for these organizations. But the issue of gentrification now looms large, and it certainly didn't when we started, and now has to be thought about right from the beginning. And this is actually a question that you could almost answer better than me, having your own, substantial background in urban planning. The ways to mitigate against gentrification are clearly to have both affordable housing at a significant level and to make sure that the mix of cultural institutions includes a lot of organizations that are of the community, that are doing work in that community. It is also important that every institution there have outreach programs, provide scholarships, bring in interns from the local neighborhood, and do things that support opportunities for everyone living in their neighborhood. Not only do we want these communities to be diverse and inclusive because it's the right thing to do, we want them to be that way because it's the most interesting thing to do. The idea that people would come to a community like or be in the BAM area and that everything would feel the same socioeconomically and in terms of artistically and in every way would really dull it down. We want things to be possible for everyone. We want to make sure that there are economic layers of opportunity for everyone. And then we want to make sure that the programs provide entry points, different entry points, so that people with all different kinds of interests can connect to what's happening culturally. And I believe that this can happen today. I believe that a cultural district can think about itself through the lens of art in every way, in the housing, in terms of jobs, in terms of economic equality. In every way, we think about these issues both socially, economically, and culturally. They don't have to stay separate. We can think about them together, and in doing so, we can build the most vibrant cultural communities in the world.
So in the 30 seconds that we have left, let me ask you a very quick question. Given everything that we've been through over the last 18 months or so with COVID and all of the challenges that arts institutions and New York City has endured, are you an optimist? Are you an optimist about the future of BAM? Are you an optimist about the future of arts and culture in New York? And are you an optimist about the future of Brooklyn and the city?
I am an optimist about everything. And there are really two reasons why. And one is this digital realm is remarkable. So many millions of additional people that weren't paying attention to arts and culture at the same level are now involved. So that means that the audience for our work has expanded and now reaches into every corner of the globe. The second part is that I now think many communities and municipal leaders kind of saw what it was like to not have us around, to see what it felt like when our venues were shuttered, to feel what the emptiness in terms of street life and vitality was. This means to me that maybe now they will consider upping the ante, investing more, seeing culture as a municipal investment, not as some elitist thing, and certainly not only something that exists in the realm of philanthropy. So I think coming out of COVID, hopefully we're going to get some more money and some more respect. And I'll leave it there.
Well, that's a great place to end. I'm sure that we could spend hours more talking about this topic. But Karen, thank you so much for joining us. Best of luck, and best of luck as your book, Bam, and Then It Hit Me, comes out and hits the public. Good luck with everything.
Thank you, Seth. Great talking to you.